I would like to call the regularly scheduled Plan Commission meeting to order. Let the record reflect.
It's like
Let the record reflect. It is Thursday, January 7th, 2021 at 7 p.m. This is Chairman Gray speaking. At this time, I ask that everyone joining us remotely to please mute your phones. Thank you. For those wishing to follow along with the PowerPoint, you are encouraged to access the meeting through Tinley Park Television on YouTube. It is my understanding that all members and staff present have checked in on the conference line, and we can begin our meeting. Please note, throughout the meeting, we expect to have other individuals joining us via phone call pertaining to specific agenda items. Thank you in advance for your patience and cooperation throughout tonight's Plan Commission meeting, which is convening remotely via conference call. This open meeting of the Village of Tinley Park is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Pritzker's Executive Order 2020-07, issued on March 16th, 2020, which suspends the Open Meetings Act provisions relating to in-person attendance by members of a public body. The Open Meetings Act, OMA, requires public bodies to allow for public comment. Therefore, this meeting will include public comment via the established protocol. Even if members of the public do not provide comment, participants are advised that people may be listening who do not provide comment and that those persons are not required to identify themselves. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by web or audio conference. We're all getting used to working and meeting remotely, so I do not feel it's necessary to go over the protocols. Again, please just remember to wait until I address you. Also identify your name when you do speak, and then please keep your phones muted when you are not speaking. Thank you. At this time, I'll ask our Commission Secretary to please take the roll call.
Engel, Manny, Gatto,
Present.
West,
Present.
Gaskell,
Present.
Aitchison,
Present.
Vic,
Present.
Busciuto,
Present.
Chairman Gray.
Present.
Okay.
Okay. This is Chairman Gray. Staff, are there any communications for the Commission at this time?
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you. This is, again, Chairman Gray. Let us now begin with the approval of the minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the December 3rd meeting?
This is Commissioner West. So moved.
This is Commissioner Gatto. I second that motion.
This is Chairman Gray. Motion made by Commissioner West, seconded by Commissioner Gatto. I will ask for a voice vote. If people could please mute their phones.
Who just signed in?
Please mute your phone. Okay, we appreciate it. Thank
Robert Sanfilippo, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So let me just repeat. Motion made by Commissioner West, seconded by Commissioner Gatto to approve the meeting minutes. I will ask for a voice vote. Are there any opposed to this motion? Hearing none, the motion is carried. We have one item on tonight's agenda. It is a public hearing to consider recommending that the Village Board grant Stephanie Mikesell on behalf of Heyday LLC, doing business as Whistle Events and Catering, a special use permit for a banquet facility with a parking variation located in the Bremen Town Mini Mall at 7537 159th Street in the B1 Neighborhood Shopping Zoning District. May I have a motion to open the public hearing?
Commissioner Gaskell, I make the motion.
This is Commissioner Vic. I second the motion.
Okay, this is Chairman Gray. Motion made by Commissioner Gaskell, seconded by Commissioner Vic. I will ask for a voice vote. Are there any opposed to this motion? Hearing none, the motion is carried. I have received certification of the public hearing notice being published in the local newspaper. Anyone wishing to speak on this matter will be sworn in before they speak, but after the staff's presentation. So staff, at this time, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Chairman Gray. Most of us, with the exception of Commissioner I'm going to mispronounce, Frank L. and Kayla West, were part of the workshop on this project back in February 20, almost a year ago, 2020. But I have provided minutes of that meeting in your packets, so hopefully those two commissioners had an opportunity to look at that. And I know I have spoken with our newest member, and he has stated that he understands the project and has had all his questions answered. So I'm going to go through the project and for the benefit of the general public as well, kind of go over the issues that were addressed at that meeting as well. As Chairman Gray mentioned, we're looking at a special use this evening for a banquet facility at 7537B 159th Street, where the Whistle currently exists, and this is just around the corner from that. It's going to be called Whistle Events and Catering. And it also is going to require a parking variation as a consequence of the special use that they are asking for. Most of you, again, except the two new members, are aware that back when the petitioner first approached the village, there was no possibility to do a banquet facility in this location because banquet facilities were only allowed in the ORI in the M1 district. Therefore, the village staff had to adopt a text amendment to provide for banquet facilities in the business district, and therefore that was done. We did provide for banquet facilities in B1, B2, B3, and B4 districts. It remains also available in the ORI and M1 district. So as part of that text amendment, staff reviewed all the issues related to banquet facilities and any impacts or potential impacts that could result from those uses in those districts, with probably the primary concern by staff and Planning Commission and Village Board was parking. So there was parking parameters provided as part of that text amendment as well. Point in fact, when that text amendment got to the board level at the meeting where they were approving the text amendment, they actually increased the parking requirements for banquet facilities at that meeting. And that was primarily because B1 district is the neighborhood shopping district and is the one business district that is typically associated and in close proximity to residential properties. Therefore, I believe the board felt that they wanted to make sure that the parking was not going to negatively impact the residential areas. Let's advance to the next slide. Let's just talk a little bit about the location and the general history of the location of this center. Some of you may or may not be aware that this shopping center is called the Brementown Mini Mall. It was actually erected in 1973, so it's an older facility that has changed hands several times, and they have struggled. I've had lengthy discussions with the current owner, and they certainly struggle under the Cook County tax burden, as well as what he feels is a very restrictive zoning in B1, that they are the most restrictive business district. However, with the Whistle coming there back in, and I have the date here, at least a couple of years ago, and I'm sorry, it's not off the top of my head, when the Whistle, they opened in June of 2017, and that really turned things around for the Brementown Mini Mall. They've been very successful. They have their gaming license. They operate out of 4,450 square feet. Their front door is there on the east side of the center. And with the opening of that business, the owner has certainly been able to see an increased cash flow with his business and has been able to make some corresponding improvements to the facility. But going back a little bit to the history of the center, in 1973, Brementown Estates, which is the subdivision south of this center, had already been constructed. So the single-family homes did precede the commercial center. I don't have a lot of information of what the thinking was at that time, but I'm sure that is why the zoning was B1 out of respect for the single-family residential properties across 159th Place. The multifamily development directly east of the shopping center was developed a year later in 1974. It used to be called Orland Creek Apartments and is now called the Residences 159th. And then the rest of the area, if you go to the west, there is also some multifamily and commercial as you go down 159th Street. But this site is unique in that the B1 zoning for this property is the only commercial property on 159th Street zoned to that district, with 159th being a 4-lane, commercial corridor. Certainly, it has commanded higher zoning districts along that area, but none of them have the proximity and adjacency to single-family homes such as this property. So the center, which is just less than 30,000 square feet, has 16 tenant spaces, and right now there are 7 vacancies in that property. And as I mentioned, the property owner has had difficulty in maintaining any kind of tenancy, but certainly having the Whistle serve as a major anchor for this facility has improved the situation. And absent COVID, he certainly is feeling more optimistic going forward in terms of the viability of the center. Consequently, he's been able to make some improvements. Some of you may have noticed the painting of the facility has really been an improvement. And in the spring, I think you'll notice a lot of the additional landscaping that has been done. We discussed this in the workshop, and at that time, back in February, we discussed how the owners, and Bobby's online with us today, and Mark's wife, Stephanie, they wanted to create a banquet facility that was distinct, though, from the Whistle. They distinct physically as well from a business perspective. They wanted a distinct business license, distinct liquor license, and physically didn't want to have any connection with the restaurant. And as I mentioned, that was not possible at that time because banquet facilities were not allowed. But subsequent to the adoption of the ordinance, they were able to then submit for an application with us for a banquet facility last year. An occupancy permit actually was issued to them as an extension of the Whistle Sports Bar and Grill in February. It was actually February 6th of 2020 last year. So they've operated almost a year, but of course they've been operating under COVID conditions as well. Let's move to the next slide. Just to give this some context in terms of zoning, as I mentioned, south is from in town estates, and that is residential. To the west, there's a 7-Eleven convenience store and gas station. That's V3, and there's also some multifamily uses just south of that, which is zoned R5. And then to the east, we have the apartment complex, which is zoned R6. The new text amendment that we created for banquet facility, the request that the petitioners have certainly meets that request in providing a distinct facility that provides and programs private events, could be anniversaries, corporate parties, or such. And they may or may not have on-site kitchen facilities. Recently, the board actually approved an amendment to their liquor license, which at one time did have some prohibitions and requirements for catering. It's now open, so the Whistle can or may not cater from within. They can cater for parties outside, so that has provided them more flexibility for the business. The space that they occupy now as an extension of the Whistle is 2,120 square feet, and it has 76 seats in it with a capacity of 99 people. Back when we did go through this with the workshop, and as I mentioned before, parking seemed to dominate the conversation. There was concerns about whether they could accommodate all their parking on site, which is a requirement of all of our business districts. There was some informal studies, and I'll go over that in a minute. But at the workshop, we had requested the applicant to procure a professional parking study for the public hearing, which was originally scheduled for March of last year. However, we all know what happened in March, since I've been home since March, and it really does not present an opportunity to do any meaningful parking study during COVID. They've existed for a year. During that time, they've existed, in business conditions that is not what they had set out to do. They still want to operate as a separate business from the whistle. Therefore, they're back before us, asking us to please consider granting the special use for a banquet facility, absent a parking study, and so they can work towards or work in the future as a separate entity from the whistle. I had a quote in the staff report that was back from last February, and I think this was from Mark Meixel, but he says, in February 9th of 2020, they were at full capacity at the Whistle Sports Bar and Grill. And meanwhile, there was an event at the banquet facility with 90 guests present. He had surveyed the parking lot during that time, and while other businesses were open, he still had a vacancy of 30 spaces. Now, that's informal, certainly done by the petitioner, but I wanted to make sure we provided as much information regarding parking as possible. In addition, back then in February, so these are non-COVID times, and let's go to the next table, please. I have a chart that the police provided for me. They did, I think it was 4 different weekends. They did a tally. They went out at 6 and 9 p.m. And midnight. And then they also looked at Sunday. They did a couple Sundays as well. And what they did, they counted the occupied spaces, obviously, and then I tallied what the vacancies were. There are 185 parking spaces provided there. And as you can see, for the most part, running from February 7th down to February 28th, there was ample parking available. Numbers of vacant parking spaces as high as 141, 139, down to 70s, 80s. There's one at 23. And I highlighted the one that was most notable, and that was at 6 p.m. on the 29th of February. And looking back at the UFC fight schedule, it indeed was a night of a UFC fight. And in speaking with the applicants, they told me that those are the nights that they are themselves also concerned about. That is their greatest occupancy. They obviously are very successful in staying open and televising the UFC fights. And therefore, he has, on his own, decided to provide off-site parking for his employees, providing up to 25 spaces. I'll quickly read his quote that Mark Meixel sent to me. He goes, "We've taken care of the parking situation and freed up to 25 spaces for UFC or any other special event nights." He's doing that over at the Marquette Bank. And he feels it would be more efficient and safer for employees to park elsewhere instead of his customers. And therefore, he'd be removing roughly 25 employees' spots. And, I commend Mark for taking the initiative and doing this. And I provide this information really for anecdotal purposes only. I, as staff in the village, can't really recognize this as something that can constitute a parking relief. It's off-site. It's not something under the same ownership. Our code actually only allows us to do anything off-site if it's under common ownership. I think it's certainly something for you to include when you're considering this issue and something to think about. At the end of the day, it's going to be the ownership that, certainly has motivation to make sure that their customers are adequately provided on site. And that they're safely provided safe parking and access to their facility. So if they know that they're going to have issues for nights such as this UFC fight nights, then, it would behoove them to provide opportunities for at least their employees to park elsewhere. The village, has recourse if this special use is approved this evening and the parking variation is approved, and if there is issues that impact the safety and the health and welfare of our community, there's certainly things that the village can do to enforce parking requirements. On-street parking would probably be the spillover for these areas. If we get complaints, we certainly can go to some sort of permit parking. We obviously will be monitoring the parking lot to make sure that there's no double parking and that there's safe access and emergency access to all doorways. Historically, and I wasn't here at that time, but I have been told by several people that there have been, uses that were similar, if not more intense than the Whistle. There was a nightclub, Geo Fitz, there that had, I am told, again, this is hearsay, but they had a lot of parking issues. And yet we don't seem to historically have a lot of complaints from the neighborhood. So it's certainly something we want to be cognizant of. We don't want to create situations that could negatively impact the neighborhood. But as I mentioned in my report, and it's sort of my soapbox speech, parking is such an imperfect science. I went on and on about it in the report, but I think it's interesting. If we go to the next table, please, you'll see that I can certainly make an accounting. I can do an accounting of the uses that are there in that center and make some assumptions about the vacancies. This is where the difficulty lies. I've worked in several villages, and no zoning code is the same from village to village. Everyone has their own parking ratios. And ours, I would say, and Dan can certainly giggle in the background, it's somewhat antiquated. And it doesn't even address many of the uses that we have a lot of concerns about. They aren't even addressed in our code. But it's what we have, and my job is to enforce the code as it stands. And that is what this table does. It takes the uses that we have and assigns a parking requirement per our code. Right off the top, you see that the Whistle has a requirement of 54 spaces and the banquet facility at 32. Together, that's 87 spaces. And yet, with their doorways to the north, they use the north parking field and the east parking field. There are 105 spaces just in those two areas. But, of course, there are other uses on the north side of that building. You have the Burrito Jalisco, as well as a vacancy. But even the three businesses that exist now only count up to 102 required spaces per our code again in an area where there's 105 spaces. But overall, you'll see as the table tabulates, once you get to the lower half of that table, there has to be some assumptions made because those are the vacancies. Some of them quite big. The one suite at 7545, which is on the north side of the mall, is 3,000 square feet. There used to be a fitness center in there. We don't know how that parcel or that lease space will be occupied. On a low end, if it were office, it would only require 12 spaces. If it was retail, it would require 20. That's why you see a range there of 26 to 38 anticipated parking spaces needed for the vacancies. So we get up to a total of 208 to 220 spaces needed, 185 required. Therefore, we got a deficiency of 23 to 35 spaces. So that's just the numbers applying the code. And I just want to do a little sidebar here, and I said it in the staff report, but I just want to explain it again in terms of why I don't think parking is, or determination of parking ratios is less than perfect in terms of looking at it. This is science. One of the manuals that we use in-house is an Institute of Transportation Engineers, the ITE Parking Generation Manual. There are a lot of manuals out there. A lot of the transportation engineers study parking all the time. This particular manual that we use has studied commercial and residential uses across the nation. And they do editions every year or so. This was the 5th edition that we had. It was published in 2019, so it's pretty current. And they will go out to a particular use, like let's say a Starbucks. They'll look at Starbucks across the country and come up with some ratio that is fairly consistent amongst a drive-through coffee shop like that, and then they'll publish it. But they, like everything, they put a qualifier on things, and they want to make sure that anyone using their ratios understand that you really have to think of all the individual characteristics of the site when you're doing it. And one of the things that really stuck out for me was their expression of caution when you think about shared parking opportunities. And this is where I think our code is probably most deficient. When you have a shared parking situation, a multi-tenant centers, you look at Brookside Marketplace on the large size, and then you've got something like the Birmingham Mini Mall. And then you even have some of our little neighborhood shopping centers that have, maybe 5 to 8 different tenants in them. Certainly in these situations, there's opportunities for shared parking. Not only in the situation where someone might park and go to 2 of the tenants, but I think probably more so in the sort of symbiotic relationship between the different uses. You may have, like in this case, the Whistle, where he has his peak hours in the evening. The office spaces directly to the south of him, their peak hours are during the day. So a lot of these multi-tenant spaces certainly can take advantage of those relationships and the ability to share parking because of their peak parking needs. What was interesting when I looked at our code, we don't even provide for that opportunity. We actually say where there's joint parking facilities, each individual tenant has to provide their individual needs. So it provides no incentive. If you had 5 different uses, you have to provide the parking requirements for each one of those uses. The only place where there's a slight advantage, and that's an exaggeration, is where they look at shopping centers such as this, where typically the retail would look at, in those kind of shopping centers, 1 parking space for 150 square feet, or we always translate it into 1,000 square feet. So that translates to 6.6 spaces per 1,000 square feet of gross leasable floor area. And then they give an advantage to what they consider a planned shopping center, and they give them 6.5 spaces per 1,000. That's only a 0.1 space advantage for a planned shopping center, which is ridiculous, negligible. When I looked at our manual, our reference manual, again, this is not code, it's just something I'm illustrating that there's such a range of parking requirements in terms of the industry. The manual states in shopping center, it can range anywhere from as low as 4.7 spaces per 1,000 to 5.1. And compare that to our 6.5 spaces. So that certainly is a difference. And I think and as we have time, our staff is going to revise our parking ratios. But I think over time, what the industry has realized, and especially as the price of real estate has increased, that we have overparked a lot of our shopping centers. We have seas of asphalt where everything was designed for the day after Thanksgiving. And the cost of that in terms of asphalt, stormwater detention, and just cost of land has gotten to the point that a lot of the smarter developments and newer developments have ratcheted down those requirements. Probably the most recent example, and I think pretty much all but maybe Frank was on the board when we did the approval for Brixmore on the east side of Harlem Avenue, where Waltz is at, that area there that's under construction right now. And they had a requirement just for the grocery store at 4.5, but that whole center was approved at 4.64 spaces per 1,000. And at the end of the day, when I meshed all the uses of that whole center, it's a huge center, it only increased to 4.676 spaces. I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you, but these are all in your staff report. The point being that there is such a range of parking requirements. There's no specific standard of the industry. And what it says to me is that there's certainly flexibility, but there's also a need to look at what the history of the center has been and how it's operating. So I took some of those numbers, like the 4.64 to 5.1, and I applied that to the Brementown mini mall, and it actually reduces the requirements down to 130 to 149 spaces required if I had the ability to use those ratios, which we don't. And that is why we need to look at a variation for this property because, and again, it's very difficult to even grant a variation because the tenancy in these centers are fluid. We could grant a variation, and then the tenant mix could be such in 6 months from now that it would totally reduce the parking requirements. So, but right now we have to take things as they are in terms of current conditions, and those were the numbers that I gave you in the report. And if all the vacant spaces were leased to office uses, we would need a variation of 23 parking spaces. If all the spaces were leased to retail, we would need a 35 space variation. So that is pretty much where the range is for the current conditions in terms of the variation that's requested. Hopefully I didn't lose you and it all made sense. So tonight, as I've said, we're looking at a special use that will require a parking variation. I can go over those standards of the variation once we get out of the public hearing. The only issues were related to the special use, and we discussed this at the workshop, that parking really seemed to be the only issues that were of concern to the commission when considering the granting of the special use. Their hours will mimic the whistle, although in speaking with the petitioner, it's more likely that these will be, typical, shower events and birthday parties, and they're looking at anywhere from 11 until, evening hours. But their liquor license would allow them to go till 2 a.m. I think it's 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. is what their liquor license will allow them to function. So, Chairman, that's all I have in terms of the variation and the special use. And upon your direction, I can provide the findings for both of those after the closing of the public hearing.
Okay, thanks, Paula. This is Chairman Gray. At this time, I'm going to ask if the applicant who's attending the meeting has anything to add at this time. If you do, I will swear you in. So if you'd like to speak, identify yourself, and then I will swear you in.
Hey, this is Robert Sanfilippo. And you got Mark here, too, it sounds like.
Okay. And that's Mark Mikesell, right? Correct? Just for the record?
Yes.
Okay. So, gentlemen, Mark and Robert, do you swear or affirm that the evidence that you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Excellent. We'll move. So if you want to speak, go ahead. Just identify yourself and take turns accordingly.
Bobby, you can go first. This is Bob Sanfilippo. I'm a half owner of the Whistle Events and Catering. And like I said in the past meetings, and we're just trying to get something nice in Tinley that will be able to help people use a banquet facility instead of traveling to other towns. The parking issue became a problem, I guess, after we were under construction 3/4 of the way. Not that would have changed our idea, because I think that the village needs a comprehensive facility for events, whether it's a birthday, a wedding shower, a baby shower, a COVID party. But I do understand that we've already secured spots across the street for staff. We understand that we will try and also work with booking of parties when you have special events like UFC fights or boxing, or maybe even if the Bears ever made it to the Super Bowl type of event. We would, try to understand the fact that, we don't want to maybe overlap due to the fact that we have half ownership of the Whistle Events Catering being Stephanie, so we will, we know the schedules. we operate as two separate businesses due to the way we're going to run our books based on our LLC. Other than that, I'd like to thank the board and the Plan Commission for all the time. I think Paul has said everything properly as best as can be. It's a mixed-use space, and there's a lot of space that's not available, and I'm not, an expert on parking, but I think that it's been running well since we've been running it as Whistle and Sports Bar and Grill. And what's the difference if it's Whistle and Sports Bar and Grill having a banquet hall or it's Whistle Events Catering? What is the difference? We're operating now, and the difference for us would be to run our LLCs properly. Thank you again for the board and the commission. I really appreciate the time and all your, timeless donations to the village. I appreciate that, and I hope it all works out for the people in the village of Tinley Park. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Robert, for your comments. They're appreciated, and thanks for being here. Mike, if you wish to speak, please do so.
Well, I don't have a lot to add. I'd just like to thank everyone for their time. And, we've been down this road, and, obviously it's been a tough year for everyone. And we continue to, try to battle with our limitations. I appreciate everyone's support. And, like Bobby said, we're just trying to separate the businesses because it makes it easier for us to run with two separate LLCs. There's not a lot to add, but I appreciate you guys considering this and putting us back on the agenda. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Appreciate the comments. At this time, again, this is Chairman Gray. At this time, I'm going to go to our commissioners to ask if they have any comments to add as well, beginning with Commissioner Lasciuto.
Yes, this is Commissioner Lasciuto. I just had a few comments. First off, I just want to, thank the staff. It was a very good report, especially, helping us understand the issues with these, with the parking, possible limitations. And I think you addressed, all the issues. My concern would be that it is still zoned B1. You do have residential. And I know, Paula, you made mention of the fact that if this does become an issue down the road, that permit parking signs could be put up in the area to alleviate any of the congestion in the neighborhood. So that would be one of my concerns going forward, with the UFC fight events and other events going on at the banquet hall. But if, the village would be able to do something like that later down the road, if it becomes an issue, that kind of alleviates any of my concerns.
Okay, excellent comments, Commissioner Lasciuto. Commissioner Aitchison.
I have none at this time.
Okay, Commissioner West.
No, I would want to thank the staff for a great presentation, and thanks again for being cognizant of the fact that I think I started in April of 2020, so I wasn't familiar with the project and I wasn't there for the workshop. So thank you for including that in this meeting's packet. But I don't have anything else to add. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Commissioner Gatto.
I'm just going to echo what Commissioner Lasciuto said. I agree, as long as Paula thinks that the parking is okay with the study that they did and everything else, and if there is a problem later on, that the individual that owns the building can approach the whistle, and they can come up with a resolution so that there isn't issues with people parking in the residential area. I'm okay with it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Gaskell.
No comment.
Okay. Commissioner Vick?
I just wanted to, echo some of the stuff, and also kind of back what I talked about in February, just to the fact of, this project, this business is already open, and they are operating, even though they're operating in the space considered owned by, with the Whistle Bar, Sports Bar and Grill versus the separate things. So, I just want to, make sure that, everything is, is okay. And I think that, everything is being someone that lives right in the area here and stuff, yeah, there are nights where it is full, but there's still other parking spots available within that mall that I've seen. I haven't seen too many times where I don't see any open spots whatsoever. And then after some of the businesses close, of course, there's more open spots. I think this would be fine. I think we should be, it'll be a good addition to the area and to the town, and good luck to Mark and Bob there on this venture, and good job. Thank you to the staff for their presentation.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Vick. This is Commissioner Gray, or Chairman Gray. At this time, I do have some comments to add. I do agree with, want to echo the comments of Commissioner Gatto and Commissioner Lasciuto in terms, and I know staff did a great job in the presentation. Paula mentioned this about if there is spillover or spillage onto those residential streets, 159th Place to the south there, that the Tinley does have the ability to then go towards permit parking to protect and the residential properties, because you don't want to have that spillage. I do think it was good to have all that data from the parking all the way up just before the pandemic hit. And it is interesting to see that the youth, the ultimate fighting night, you had a couple of spots left, but I do appreciate the fact that the petitioner for those nights recognizes that they do get peak volume. And I know, as Paula and staff mentioned, it's not something we can enforce because it's off property. In terms of the employees parking somewhere else, freeing up 25 spots where you may only have 2 available, that will actually take care of that. But I also want to just comment that I agree with Paula what you mentioned about revisiting those parking ratios. Think about now, a lot of people shop online, so those Black Friday events. Even the Black Friday events aren't that well attended prior to the pandemic. So in terms of the excess parking lot and a lot of the asphalt, and then, of course, you have to have more detention and whatnot, it's probably a very smart idea to revisit that, and just recognizing the flexibility that, based on those data that we saw from those parking studies, 6 p.m., 9 p.m., those are their peak volumes. It starts to peter out after midnight a little bit. And so, you're not going to be able to control who moves in to the former fitness or some of these other places, but it is key. If those businesses are more geared towards operation during the day, being able to have kind of a simpatico, for lack of a better term, relationship where, parking lot's 80% full during the morning, and then it's 90% full during the night because of another business that occupies the parking lot. But either way, good job, good research into digging into those numbers, Paula. I think that did provide some clarity. But primarily, we do want to make sure that whatever happens in the future, that the residential people are protected. So, and you mentioned some of the ways that could happen. And Paula, just out of curiosity, you said GQ Fits, and I remember that place. It was a little bit before my time, but I remember it as a kid. And there was no complaints back then. But there's never been complaints from the residents in terms of street parking or whatnot that you know of?
I am not aware of any. No.
Okay.
Hey,
So,
Commissioner Gray, do you mind if I say one thing? This is Mark. When you're done, no problem.
yeah, sure. Yeah, no worries. And even still, like I have friends, some carpool, but they'll take Uber to a night out to watch fights so they can drink and then get home responsibly. So I think there's some other issues at play that I think help out some of those parking lot ratios. But with that said, I do want to say I have passed by the establishment during the year, during the different tiers or levels of COVID, and I was happy to see that you guys, Mark, you had your parking lot had quite a bit of cars, and I was happy about that because of just the hit a lot of our local owners have taken with people not going out and all the restrictions. So I wish you guys continued success, and I do hope these COVID times that you won't have to throw COVID parties because you'll be able to operate fully at 100%. So with that said, those are all my comments. Mark, you wanted to add another comment?
Yes, sir. Thank you. What I wanted to say, if we did have to go to the permit stuff, and we haven't done this because we have a lot of customers, to the south that come into the Whistle, but there's probably legitimately 10 or 12 people that live on that street that park in the lot. And, I'm in with the landlord, he's like, well, we could tow them, and I don't want to do that to the residents because most of them are our customers. But if we did go to the permit parking, that might free up some parking too, because if somebody was in fear of getting towed or something. But we don't want to do that. But if that did happen, it would probably free up a few more spots as well. But because we let them park there, they park there all the time, and it's the same cars. Because they might have 2 or 3 cars in their driveway, and they want to move one, they don't want to move it, especially during the winter because it's cold out. So they park on the south side of that lot all the time as residents. But just throwing that in there as well. So
right, and you guys are just trying to be a good neighbor, and unfortunately, yeah. If it does come to push or shove, then perhaps the village can step in to put the appropriate permit if that's the proper protocol. Paula, I'm not sure, but if there is something where people are, and I understand the situation, Mark. You want to be a good neighbor, especially if they're coming in patroning your establishment. You don't really want to be putting them
yes, sir.
to go get their car out of the tow truck facility. But maybe that's something that also should be monitored. But in due time, if it does become an issue where you don't have enough spaces. With that, is there any other comments from Robert or are you? Are you guys are?
I have none at this time. I think it was a great presentation by the staff, though, so I have nothing. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, guys. And Commission, do you have any other comments? If not, we will keep proceeding. Okay. Hearing none, we will move forward. So at this time, may I have a motion to close the public hearing?
This is Commissioner Aitchison. So moved.
This is Commissioner Lasciuto. I second that motion.
Okay, this is Chairman Gray. Motion made by Commissioner Aitchison, seconded by Commissioner Lasciuto. I will ask for a voice vote. Are there any opposed to this motion? Hearing none, the motion is carried. Now, may I have a motion regarding the site plan?
Chairman,
this is Commissioner Lasciuto.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Excuse me. Let's stop.
I'm sorry. I have to ask, to go through the standards. Yep.
Yes, totally my mistake, and there is no site plan. That's totally my mistake in the script. So let me just go over the standards real quick, and then Commissioner Lasciuto can do his motion for the variation. I'm going to go through the standards for variation first. As you know, that it must meet the 3 standards that are required. And so we'll quickly run through those. The first being that the property cannot yield a reasonable return. It was permitted to be used only under the conditions allowed by the regulations in the district. And my comment there is that, the banquet use is currently operating under the business license of the Whistle Bar and Grill. And so the parking situation exists. And this variation will allow the Whistle Event and Catering to operate as a separate business. And they have stated, the applicant has stated, it's necessary to get the variation to continue the successful, or it's necessary to operate as a separate business to be successful. And therefore, because of their desire to operate as a separate entity, they need to have a parking variation to exist on this site. The plight of the owner is due to unique circumstances, and that being it is a multi-tenant shopping center, and as I thoroughly went through the problems with our parking code and the fact that our code does not provide for shared parking opportunities as it stands now, is considered a unique circumstance. And that the variation if granted will not alter the essential character of the locality, and that is being that it has been operating for almost a year as a banquet facility in association with the the restaurant. It's accessory to the restaurant and the bar, and therefore certainly COVID has impacted it, but it did have some time operating prior to COVID, and the fact that the applicant has arranged for off-site parking for the employees that we think will mitigate some of the need for parking on site. I'd like to now move on to the standards for special use. As you know, there are several of them. I'm going to just summarize that with any special use, we certainly want to do whatever, anything we can to mitigate any negative impact on the health, safety, and welfare of the general population and the general area of the site. The fact that this facility, that the Bremerton Mini Mall, has accommodated similar uses in the past with the conditions as they stand, with 185 parking spaces. There has not been any significant complaints regarding impact on the neighborhood, regarding ingress and egress and the ability to handle the traffic congestion. It has operated in that capacity since 1973, and that the granting of the special use can contribute directly or indirectly to the economic development of the community as a whole. And certainly the whistle has proven itself to be successful, and it functions as a primary anchor for the center. And as a consequence of their existence, we certainly have seen some improvements to the center that has a positive impact on the neighborhood. So those are the standards for special use and for the variation, and that concludes those. So sorry for my mistake on the script, but Commissioner Lasciuto, if you want to go on with the variation motion, please do.
Okay. Yeah, this is Commissioner Lasciuto. I make a motion to recommend that the village board grant a parking variation to the petitioner, Stephanie Mikesell, on behalf of Whistle Events and Catering for property located at 7537B, 159th Street, and adopt findings of fact as proposed in the January 7th, 2021 staff report.
This is Commissioner Aitchison. I second that motion.
This is Chairman Gray. Motion made by Commissioner Lasciuto, seconded by Commissioner Aitchison. Secretary, may I have a roll call?
Gatto,
Yes.
West,
Yes.
Gaskell,
Yes.
Vic,
Yes.
Aitchison,
Yes.
Lasciuto,
Yes.
Chairman Gray.
Yes. So the motion is carried. May I have a motion, the second motion on the special use at this time?
Yes, this is Commissioner West. I make a motion to recommend that the village board grant the petitioner, Stephanie Mikesell, on behalf of Whistle Events and Catering, a special use permit for a banquet facility for property located at 7537B, 159th Street.
This is
Do I hear a
Commissioner
second?
Gatto. I second that motion.
Okay, this is Chairman Gray. Motion made by Commissioner West, seconded by Commissioner Gatto. Secretary, may I have a roll call?
Lasciuto,
Yes.
Vic,
Yes.
Aitchison,
Yes.
Gaskell,
Yes.
West,
Yes.
Gatto,
Yes.
Chairman Gray.
Yes. The motion is carried. Okay, so this item will go to the village board on Tuesday, January 19th, 2020. So Mark and Bob, please get with the village staff on how you can attend the village board meeting on that day. And good luck, gentlemen. Thank you for your time tonight and continued success.
Thank you.
Okay. At this time, we'll move to the good of the order. Staff, do you have any comments for the good of the order?
Yes, Chairman. We have a couple big projects coming down the pike. Most of you are aware of Pete's Fresh Market. They are in phase 2. That will include the grocery store and adjacent retail, as well as an expansion of the warehouse. So that'll be phase 2. And then they are already beginning to market, but they are looking for outlots, which was not something we had contemplated when we brought this back to on phase 1, but they're looking to create some additional outlots along Harlem Avenue. So we're excited about that project. That should be coming to you February 4th, I believe. Yes, February 4th. And Crana, I have been working with them. They're still trying to work out their access on 80th Avenue. We had a meeting on that today, and so I think that's going to be submitted within the next couple of weeks as well. Dan has been working on not a new Dunkin' Donuts, but a Dunkin' Donuts over at 80th Avenue and 171st. They're looking to move from the inline stores to the outlet building. And so it has some unique characteristics and concerns regarding the stacking of the drive-through, which obviously they're very popular in the morning. And so Dan is handling that. Dan, do you have anything else that you want to add in terms of projects?
No, I think that's it for now.
The only other comment, and I know we've talked about this before, and I sound like a broken record, but it would really, really help us if you all could let Barb know as soon as possible your attendance at the meetings. We have to prepare the script, and again, I apologize for the errors on that, but I'd like to have more time putting that script together, but I can't put the script together until I know who's coming, because we put your names in there. So when we find out kind of at the last minute, we have to do a mad rush kind of moving things around. So please, 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 or even if you know right now that you're attending the next 3 meetings, let us know ahead of time. Say, yes, I'm attending all these meetings and I'm going to be missing the meeting in March or something like that. That would really, really help us out, and I would appreciate it if you could do that for us. Other than that, I think that's all the news I have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paula. This is Chairman Gray. Staff, were there any public comments submitted or members of the public present wishing to speak today?
There were none. I don't think there's anyone in the audience. Is there, Barb?
No, there's not.
Okay. Well, this is Chairman Gray. If there's nothing further, I will entertain a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
This is Commissioner Gaskill. I make a motion to adjourn.
This is Commissioner Vick. I second that motion.
Okay. Motion made by Commissioner Gaskill, seconded by Commissioner Vick. I will take a voice vote for any opposed. Hearing none, the motion is carried. This meeting is adjourned at 7:57 p.m. Good night and Happy New Year, everybody.
Good night, all.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you, Gary. Sorry about the mistake. I'll look at it more closely.